2 years after escaping Brady's gilded cage, I saw him again. I was having a heated argument with my boyfriend about his childhood friend. He was shielding that woman and had shoved me roughly to the ground. I was crouched on the side of the road, crying uncontrollably. Brady bent down and gently wiped my tears with a handkerchief. "Have you forgotten everything I taught you?" He took my hand and slapped it hard against my boyfriend's face. "Olivia, if anyone bullies you, just hit them back. If the sky falls, Brady, will hold it up for you." I remember that day was early autumn in Beijing. It had been exactly 2 years since Brady and I broke up. Beijing is so vast that someone like me, once gone, is like a drop of water lost in the flood, instantly disappearing without a trace. In the past 2 years, Brady and I had never crossed paths, and that day, it was truly unfortunate. I was crying on the roadside, looking like a miserable stray dog. Nelson was busy, soothing his little childhood friend, and didn't even glance at me. My hair was a mess, my face swollen. After crying so much, my makeup was probably a bit smeared too. Brady got out of the car and stood in front of me. At first, I only saw his neatly pressed trousers, and the spotless shine of his shoes. When I finally lifted my disheveled face and saw Brady, I was stunned for a moment, frozen for a full half-minute. He just stood there, looking down at me from above. Compared to 2 years ago, he seemed to have a much stronger presence. His brows and eyes had a slight downward tilt, carrying the air of someone who had long held power. I felt a bit disoriented, wondering how I once dared to barge into his office, how I had turned off his video conference, and climbed into his lap to act spoiled. Brady bent down and pulled out a neatly folded handkerchief. He wiped my tears with a very gentle and patient touch. "Come on, don't cry." He pinched my tear-streaked face, and gently wiped away the tears from my lashes. "Have you forgotten everything I taught you?" When Brady slapped Nelson's face, holding my hand, both Nelson and his delicate little friend were shocked. The slap was hard, and my fingers itched a bit. Brady released my hand and gave them a frosty look. "Olivia, if anyone bullies you, just hit them back. If the sky falls, Brady, will hold it up for you." I looked at the woman in Nelson's arms. While it's true that men should be dealt with first, she had just slapped me relying on Nelson's support, so I needed to settle the score with her. "Nelson." The little friend was clearly terrified, clutching Nelson and trembling. Brady glanced slightly upwards, and Nelson, seeing the bodyguards nearby, didn't dare to make a sound. I slapped her back, and she covered her face, crying with a pitiful look. Nelson's face turned dark with rage as he glared at me, and protected her as they left. I turned to Brady. "Thank you for what you did just now." At least I had vented some of my frustration. Ending things with Nelson was inevitable. "Shall I give you a ride back?" Brady pointed at my torn sleeve, which looked quite shabby. "No need, it's very close. I can walk," I said, and seeing he still had no intention of leaving, I glanced at him again. Brady took a step closer to me. "Olivia, I'm worried about you looking like this." Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh. "I remember you never used to stay involved with your exes." "That's true, but you were the one who broke up with me." Brady raised his hand and brushed a strand of my disheveled hair from my forehead. "How about this? If you break up with me one more time, we'll be even." I pushed his hand away and took a step back. "Brady, thanks for standing up for me today, but that's all there is to it." He nodded slightly. "That's fine, but a simple thank you might not be enough. Beijing is both large and small in its own way." That day, I went to the Lin family for tutoring as usual. During a break, the Lin family's little girl suddenly jumped up by the window, squealing with excitement, holding a cup of water. I walked over curiously. Downstairs, Brady's black car was parked quietly, and he was getting out of it. "Olivia Jia, isn't he handsome?" My heart can barely take it. The little girl was only in the second year of junior high. At the age of first love, I smiled. "All right, stop fangirling and come back to class." At the end of the tutoring session, I left some homework for her to finish. Mrs. Lin suddenly knocked on the door and apologetically said, "Olivia, could you help me with a small favor?" When I came back with the book Mrs. Lin needed from the basement library, I found the whole house eerily quiet. The busy servants had all disappeared. I went upstairs, and the little girl wasn't in her room. Her homework book was open as if she had just left. After hesitating for a moment, I put the book on the desk, packed up my backpack, and went downstairs. As I reached the corner of the stairs, I saw someone standing in the living room, in a navy blue shirt and immaculately pressed trousers. Just from his back, I recognized him. I realized that probably the Lin family had been sent away by him. That was one thing that hadn't changed: his knack for finding ways to entertain himself. I walked downstairs expressionlessly and headed straight for the door. Olivia, Brady, this is someone else's home. It's just a house. Giving them something better is fine. I held onto my backpack straps and turned to look at him. Is this amusing to you? You know, business is always dull, and it's rare to have some fun. He lit a cigarette but didn't ignite it. With the free hand, he slowly untied his tie. My backpack fell to the ground, and he used his tie to bind my wrists behind me. He leaned down and kissed the corner of my lips, his relaxed expression showing a hint of satisfaction. The taste of Olivia is still the same. The basement library was lit by a few wall lamps. The soft, dim yellow light spread, giving my body a honeyed hue. Brady meticulously explored every inch of me. When his fingers grazed the tattoo on my lower abdomen, he frowned. Did you get a tattoo? Yeah, I got it with my boyfriend. The tight binding on my wrists was uncomfortable, so I twisted my body a little. Sorry, I haven't danced or practiced for 2 years, so I'm a bit stiff and might not be able to keep up. Brady seemed almost amused. He lit a cigarette but suddenly extinguished it halfway through. He threw me onto the large sofa and lay down on top of me. Olivia, you don't need to think of me as such a pervert. Brady leaned down and kissed me. After all, our normal times still outweigh. I blinked, looked at him, and smiled sweetly and innocently. Then you should be a bit more perverted. He hesitated slightly as he unbuckled his belt. I smiled even more broadly. It's more exciting that way. You get more aroused. The process will be shorter, and I won't have to endure you for too long. I had never seen such a dark and frightening expression on Brady's face before. This was the first time, and it would certainly be unforgettable. When it all ended, it was already late at night. My knees and elbows were scraped raw. My cheeks had deep red marks from his fingers. When Brady unfastened the tie from my wrists and buttoned his shirt to leave, I hoarsely called out to him. He stood there, his gaze dark, looking at me lying on the floor. I didn't care that my clothes weren't fully on. I just grabbed my phone and pulled up my payment code. Cash on delivery. I threw the phone in front of him, looking at him with a calm and cold gaze. You better settle this with money, or I swear I'll sue you to the fullest extent. Brady looked at me for about half a minute before suddenly laughing. He picked up the phone, transferred the money, and handed it back to me. He didn't say a word and turned to leave. I stayed on the ground, listening to his footsteps fading away, thinking of his earlier smile. I suddenly lowered my lashes and smiled gently. My story with Brady truly began on this day. 2 years later, 3 days later, while I was having lunch in the school cafeteria with Nelson, Brady's assistant Neil suddenly called. Oh, tell him I'm busy. Yeah, I'm on a date with my boyfriend, I said and hung up the phone, continuing to leisurely sip my seaweed soup. Nelson looked at me with a complicated expression, several times wanting to speak but hesitating. After finishing my soup, I stood up. Nelson, I don't care who you mess around with. Don't interfere with my private matters, but in public, we're still a couple. Nelson seemed almost amused. Olivia, do you love me too much, or not at all? I ignored him, directly linking my arm with his and walking out. As we passed Brady's car, I acted like every lovesick girl on campus. I held Nelson's hand, bouncing and jumping, and climbed onto his back, asking him to carry me. As we walked past the passenger side window, I even leaned down and kissed Nelson's face. Inside the car, Neil groaned internally and covered his face. Brady, seemingly oblivious to the scene, calmly instructed the driver to start the car. Neil called me again a week later. I once again refused, citing a date with my boyfriend. The third time he called, I told Neil to pass the phone to Brady. Do you really want to be a mistress? Olivia, don't test my patience. Why should I care? Who do you think you are? I scoffed. What? Haven't found someone you like yet, and want to chase after me? Brady seemed amused by my words. Sorry, Brady. 2 years ago, I was young and foolish, tempted by money to be a mistress. But now I've grown up and won't do such shameful things anymore. So what do you want? Have the guts to marry me? Dating without marriage is just playing around. Brady, if you're willing to marry me, I'm willing to give you a chance to make amends. After saying that, I ignored him and added coldly, think it over before you call me again. If you haven't decided, stop harassing a good girl. This time, it didn't take long. Just a day later, Brady called me. Olivia, have you forgotten something? You're not broken up either. Why should we break up? Nelson promised to marry me, and you didn't. Come downstairs. I won't. Olivia, Brady's voice suddenly raised a notch. I knew when to stop. Holding the phone, I looked at myself in the mirror, just out of the shower, with wet hair. My face was flushed from the steam, clean and pure. I couldn't help but touch my face. I quickly tilted my face up, forcing back the tears that were about to spill. I just got out of the shower and haven't dried my hair. If you're willing to wait, then wait. If not, then forget it. I hung up the phone but sat there dazed for a while before finally getting up to dry my hair. After drying my hair, I still didn't go downstairs immediately. I took my time choosing clothes, eventually settling on a t-shirt and pajama pants, still wearing my flip-flops. It had been over an hour since I hung up. I slowly went downstairs, my mind blank, unsure of what I was thinking. Brady's car was hidden under the trees. I stood in front of the dormitory building for a minute, then walked over. Brady was sitting in the car, watching me. 2 years ago, Olivia would wear various beautiful dresses and meticulous makeup, like a sweet lover dripping with honey, affectionate and charming. Now, Olivia didn't wear makeup or dress up, with a plain face and a stubborn attitude. Yet, she was strangely captivating, leaving people both loving and hating her. The car door opened, and I didn't get in. Curious students looked over. Olivia, get in the car. Brady's tone was gentle and indulgent. I turned my face away, lips tightly pressed together, looking stubborn and irritating. I won't. Olivia, stop being difficult. Brady reached out, took my hand, and pulled me inside. I ended up sitting on his lap, trying to push him away, hands resisting his chest, but not looking at him. Brady, last time you hurt my wrists and knees. I get angry just thinking about it. I hate you, don't want to see you, and am very annoyed with you. I raised my voice, sounding like an angry, upset child. Brady held me around the waist and, with some force, pulled me closer. I stiffened, refusing to come closer. He lowered his head and gently nibbled my earlobe, sighing in resignation. If it weren't for the fact that you irritate me, would I have gone through all that trouble with you? I don't like you, Brady. All right, you don't like me. I also don't like being with you. All right, if Olivia doesn't like it, we won't do it. Brady, sitting on his lap, I stared at him defiantly, tears slowly falling from my reddened eyes. He seemed genuinely pained and finally relented. Olivia, what do you really want? If you want to be with me, then do it openly. Make me your girlfriend and introduce me to your family and friends. Brady looked at me sharply. I bit my lip and raised my chin. Otherwise, just stay out of my affairs. Olivia, you can make any other requests. I looked at him, knowing that someone like me probably wouldn't get a formal title, but it was the only request I had. I pushed him away, and turned to get out of the car. Olivia, I've never spent so much patience on anyone else. I didn't hesitate and opened the car door. I'm not forcing you, so let's just go our separate ways. Brady didn't say anything more. I got out of the car, walked a few steps forward, then suddenly stopped and turned around. Brady looked at me, his gaze unwavering, and I looked back at him, tears streaming down. I ran over and threw myself into his arms. His lips were cold, and mine were burning hot. I kissed him fiercely, and then bit him hard. He frowned in pain and pushed me away, but I raised my hand and slapped him. He avoided it a bit, so the slap landed on his jaw. Olivia, Brady, don't ever let me see you again. That night, after returning to the dorm, I fell ill. 3 days later, I moved out of the dorm and into Nelson's place. One reason Nelson had been involved with a little green plum before was that I refused to live with him. Although this excuse seemed ridiculous, it was a reflection of the true feelings of many men. On the day I moved out, Nelson specifically went to the pharmacy to buy condoms. While I was waiting for him at the pharmacy entrance, I saw Neil. He noticed Nelson coming out with a bag, and immediately pulled me into an embrace. We exchanged a brief look, and I turned my gaze away. I knew he frequented the school area almost every day, probably on Brady's orders, but it had nothing to do with me. That night made it very clear, bridges are bridges, roads are roads. Nelson's rented apartment was next to the school, and on the way back to his place, he couldn't help but start making advances. Olivia, are you really sure about this? Nelson seemed somewhat surprised. You're not going to change your mind at the last minute, are you? I lazily dismissed him. No, you were adamant before. Why the sudden change of heart? Just consider it as me having normal physiological needs. All right, I'll make sure you're satisfied tonight. Nelson didn't ask further and pulled me into his arms. Olivia, from the first time I saw you, I was thinking about today. Once we were in the elevator, Nelson eagerly began kissing me. Don't kiss me on the lips. I just smoked, and it's unpleasant. Fine, fine, I'll brush my teeth right away. Nelson was obedient, seemingly afraid of upsetting me and losing the chance. He held me tightly, almost as if he wanted to press me into him. I felt a bit nauseous, but didn't push him away. At this moment, what I was thinking was, men are truly primitive beings, separating body and emotions. Nelson and his little green plum had long been in bed together, but now, he was lusting after me, having long cast aside his previous interest. Even ordinary men from middle-class families act like this. What about Brady, at the top of the social pyramid? How many birds and swallows must be around him? What beautiful women has he not seen? How much novelty could I possibly bring him? At this moment, I felt utterly disheartened. I overestimated myself and underestimated him. On the short walk from the elevator to the apartment door, Nelson's actions grew increasingly inappropriate. While unlocking the door, his hand slipped under the hem of my t-shirt. Just as his hand reached to unfasten the clasp on my back, a heavy force suddenly struck. Before I could react, Nelson was thrown heavily to the ground. As if he had been thrown out, my wrist was tightly gripped by a powerful hand. Olivia, I turned around to see Brady's indifferent eyes. Nelson was dragged to the side stairwell by security guards. I heard a few screams. Brady, don't hit him too hard. Let it go. Feeling sorry for him. We haven't broken up yet, so it's not entirely his fault. Brady pulled me a step forward. He said nothing. His brows slightly furrowed. His long fingers, warm with a hint of heat, touched my back. He gently fastened the clasp behind me. Then he smoothed out my t-shirt, which had been creased. He took my hand. Let's go. The corridor was silent. I looked down at my feet and didn't move. Brady turned back to look at me. Leanne said having a girlfriend is troublesome. Seems like it's true. My heart skipped a beat, and I looked up at him suddenly. I must not have even realized that, at that moment, my eyes were probably shining brightly. It was as if my relationship with Brady had gone back 2 years. But I was still as willful and temperamental as before. Not like before, just a well-behaved little bird. Brady had kept his word, taking me out to social events, introducing me to his close friends. Everyone knew that Brady had a young girlfriend, whom he doted on. When I was unhappy, I could directly throw his cards away. When I was angry, I would turn and walk away without regard for the occasion. The ties and belts he used, and even his intimate clothing, had to be personally selected by me. I even forced him to put a small photo of me in his wallet. A photo of me had to be displayed on his desk at the office. I would often break appointments, stand him up. Sometimes I would deliberately go missing, making him search for me through the streets of Beijing in the middle of the night. I was stubborn and arrogant, and he would occasionally get angry and storm out, giving me the cold shoulder. But within 3 days, as long as I took the initiative to apologize, he would spoil me as usual. Everything seemed to be exactly as I wanted, but my emotions were still easily depressed. I often suffered from insomnia, waking up in the middle of the night. Brady would be sleeping beside me, still holding my waist even in his dreams. By the moonlight, I would look at his features and gently caress them. He would stir slightly as if feeling some itchiness in his dream. His fingers would hold my waist, tightening and then gently stroking it, murmuring in a half-asleep state, "Olivia, be good." My tears would immediately well up. When Beijing had its first snowfall, Brady took me back to Emma's house. His father was celebrating his 60th birthday. With a grand banquet, I held on to Brady's arm, walking step by step to the couple surrounded by guests. Noelle, despite being over 60, was still vigorous and charming. Brady's mother, elegant and graceful, truly a pair of deeply affectionate lovers. When Noelle saw me, he was momentarily stunned. His gaze lingered on my pearl earrings, pausing for several seconds before moving away. Brady's mother's smile also dimmed a bit, but soon, they resumed their usual expressions. They greeted me warmly. Brady's mother took my hand. You must be Olivia. I nodded slightly. Yes, I'm Olivia. Brady's mother's hand trembled slightly. You're so beautiful, truly a good child. She patted my hand, which was now cold instead of warm. I smiled obediently. Madam, you are the epitome of grace and splendor. You're really sweet, Brady's mother said kindly, leading me to Brady. Make sure you accompany Olivia well, and take her out to play. Brady smiled and agreed. In the meantime, someone came to talk to him. I pushed him to socialize and went outside to get some fresh air. Soon, someone came looking for me. Olivia, our sir wants to see you. Okay. I put down the flowers I had just picked, and gently touched the pearls on my ears. These weren't a gift from Brady, but they were still precious. He had once asked me where such valuable earrings came from. After all, he knew my background was quite ordinary. They're the only keepsakes my mother left me. I said this with a smile in my eyes, but Brady seemed a bit pained, holding me and gently patting my back. When Noelle saw me, he seemed somewhat dazed as he took a few steps forward. Mr. Brady's father, did you need me? Olivia, what's your mother's name? Is she well? I smiled softly. Behind me were green trees, and beside me were blooming flowers. I was wearing a white dress and white pearls. I knew I must look very much like my mother when she was young. Mr. Brady's father, my mother's name was Maud Nixon. She passed away several years ago. Passed away? Noelle seemed somewhat incredulous. I watched him tremble slightly, his eyes turning a deep, painful red. What I thought was, the belated affection displayed vividly on the old man was truly nauseating. Mr. Brady's father, did you know my mother? I tilted my head, pretending to be innocently curious. He shook his head, then nodded again, looking confused and dazed. How could she have passed away so young? Noelle still didn't believe it, pulling me closer to ask. I instantly had tears in my eyes, looking down as I cried. My brother passed away in an accident after his college entrance exams. My mother couldn't handle the blow, and her health deteriorated. Your brother, when did he have the accident? And what kind of accident was it? It was in 2010. My brother had just received his acceptance letter from Peking University. After going out to dinner with classmates, he was hit by a car and died on the spot. I widened my eyes, tears dripping down one by one. I looked at Noelle, my gaze unwavering. The driver ran over him 3 times. There was no intact flesh left on him. He died with his eyes still open. Noelle shook violently, aging what seemed like 20 years in that instant, as if he were about to collapse. My mother nearly went mad. She tried to kill herself several times to join my brother. 2010. Your brother was just 18, after the college entrance exams. Noelle suddenly gripped my arm tightly. What was your brother's name? Olivia, tell me, what was your brother's name? My brother's name was James. As soon as I said this, Noelle staggered backward a step. Roman, if we have a boy in the future, let's name him James. If it's a girl, let's name her Olivia. Isn't that nice? James and Olivia. Noel's birthday banquet ended abruptly. He had a heart attack, and was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment, and the party ended in disarray. Fortunately, he was rescued in time, and Noelle was not in serious condition. After everything was settled, when Brady found me, I was still wearing the white dress from earlier, crouched in the cold, dark hallway. It was the early winter night in Beijing, so cold that water turned to ice. Brady hurried over, draping a heavy coat over my almost frozen body. Olivia, I looked up with swollen red eyes and gazed at him. Brady, it's all my fault. Did I say something wrong that made Uncle? Brady shook his head and picked me up. Let's go back. You're very cold and might catch a chill. I clung to his sleeve. Brady, they don't like me. Will they make you break up with me? He carried me forward. The night was truly dark, but the snow was so white. But before me was a vivid, dazzling blood-red scene. When my brother James died, the handlebars of his bicycle still had the fried chicken and rice cakes he was supposed to bring me. Later, his young and healthy body was crushed by a car. The food was a mess, and I couldn't distinguish between his blood and the thick, red ketchup. I would never touch those two things again in my life. When my brother died, not only did my mother's world collapse, mine did too. Brady, will you break up with me? I asked him again, stubbornly demanding an answer. Brady stopped, looking down at me quietly in the darkness. His eyes had red veins, showing undeniable fatigue. A certain part of my heart suddenly ached. In the end, he still didn't answer my question, but I continued to live in his house as before. He treated me as always. One night, I suddenly discovered that the condoms in the bedside drawer were all used up. When Brady came out of the shower, I showed him the empty box. You used them all. He came to the bed with a towel and leaned down to kiss me. I remember it's a safe period. A safe period isn't 100% safe. If there's a baby, we'll have it. He looked at me, his eyes like obsidian under his wet hair. I couldn't discern his emotions, not knowing what he was thinking. Just after he said this, I saw a faint smile at the corner of his lips. I protested, grabbing him. What do you mean? Why are you smiling? He pulled me down to lie beside him, letting me rest my head on his chest. That's what I meant. Then why are you smiling again? I was just thinking, if it's a daughter like you, it'd be really troublesome and exhausting. What's wrong with me? What makes me so troublesome? If you want to break up, just say it. I pushed against his chest, trying to get up from the bed, but Brady suddenly wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, pulling me closer, and lightly kissed my ear. Olivia, what now? During the 2 years we were apart, I often thought of you. I knew that, after all, every ex-boyfriend always remembers me. The arms wrapped around my waist tightened suddenly. I tried to struggle, but Brady pushed me onto the carpet beside the bed. Later, I would often recall that night. He was fiercer than ever before. I cried bitterly, but he showed no mercy. In the end, he held my neck, repeatedly forcing me to say, I love Brady. Olivia only loves Brady. At that moment, I was almost suffocating, and could only lower my head and comply. I thought he was angry because of my comment about my ex-boyfriend, but later, I suddenly realized why he was so unusual that night. One day, Brady went on a business trip to Shanghai for 2 days. As the semester was ending, I didn't go with him. Brady's mother happened to call me and invite me for tea. She was straightforward and handed me a large check without hesitation. Should I call you Olivia? She wore sunglasses, so I couldn't discern her expression. Overall, she looked much more haggard and thinner than on the day of Noel's birthday. Even the lines on her face were deeper, as if her entire face had sagged. Call me whatever you like, Auntie. Feel free. I don't care what you want to do. Take the money, leave Brady, and get out of Beijing. Why? I looked at the check. The amount on it was something I would never earn in 10 lifetimes, but I didn't want it. You know exactly why. I put down the check and smiled slowly. I don't understand. Madam, perhaps you should be more straightforward. Brady's mother's lips were tightly pursed. After a full half minute, she suddenly smiled and leaned slightly forward. Olivia, she took my hand. Her hand was still very cold, causing a shiver. As far as I know, you're the only child left in your family. If anything happens to you, it would mean the end for your family. As she spoke, she lightly patted my hand. Old grudges are just a matter of mutual harm and are meaningless. Besides, a dying camel is still bigger than a horse. It's you who will suffer more. Olivia, you should think carefully about what I'm saying. Madam, you only know that a dying camel is bigger than a horse. Have you ever heard the saying? A barefoot person is not afraid of those wearing shoes. I smiled even more brightly than she did. I, Olivia, am the barefoot one? It seems you're determined to walk a dead-end path. Perhaps you should persuade your son to abandon me. I pulled my hand away forcefully. After all, I've never liked him. I only approached him for my own purposes. I didn't look at how shocked Brady's mother was. Instead, I picked up the check and threw it at her face. I admit you have wealth and power, but in front of a barefoot person, Money is not everything. The night Brady returned from his business trip, it was very late. As soon as he opened the bedroom door, I threw myself into his arms. You're still up this late? He carried a strong sense of coldness and did not embrace me. I'm cold. I'll hold you later. But I wouldn't let go. Brady seemed a bit helpless. Are you being clingy again? Your mother came to see me yesterday. You knew. I knew. What are we going to do? Don't worry about it. I'll handle it. How will you handle it? Are you going to marry me directly using a fake household registration book? He relaxed his brows and smiled. You don't need to think of me as so powerless. What if your family absolutely refuses? Then what about you? What do you think? I pulled away from his embrace and sat on the sofa, resting my chin in my hand, and thinking seriously for a while. If it really doesn't work out, having a lot of money is also good. You're still quite clear-headed, Brady teased. He took off his coat, and then his suit jacket. I settled on the sofa, watching him. I recalled our first meeting. Brady, do you remember our first meeting? I do. Why didn't you drive me away, and instead took me home? I changed my position, holding a cushion and gazing at him. Do you often bring young girls home? Brady unfastened his tie and slowly undid the buttons on his shirt. I'm not that indiscriminate, only the pretty ones. He glanced at me, seeming to understand everything I wanted to say. You're the first, and the last. Why? He seemed to be thinking seriously for an answer. After a long pause, he said, initially, it was probably a sense of pity. Seeing that you were still young, it seemed a bit of a pity if you went astray. I nodded. And later, I found that you, Olivia, are delicate and gentle, truly a treasure. He walked over, pressed one leg against the side of the sofa where I was sitting, braced himself on the back of the sofa beside my face, and kissed me. I just regret now that the gentle flower has turned into a hedgehog. Do you still like me? I looked up at him. After being together for so long, he had never said he liked me. That kind of liking beyond physical attraction. He touched my face, rubbing his fingers along the corners of my eyes. He felt a damp spot. I didn't realize when I started crying. His eyes filled with tenderness. Don't cry. Olivia, do you like me? Brady. Yes. If I did something to hurt you, would you hate me? He cupped my face in his hands, and looked deeply into my eyes for a long time. Olivia, I told you from the beginning that a girl shouldn't harm herself. I still say the same thing now, no matter what. Don't hurt yourself. Answer me. I choked up and couldn't help but want to cry out loud. I wouldn't hate you. You're young, and you have the freedom to make mistakes. Brady. I hugged him tightly, striving to get as close to him as possible, wanting no gaps between us. Hold me tight, tighter. Keep holding me like this. Brady. Okay. During the winter break, I prepared to return to my small hometown. Brady suggested that I stay in Beijing for the new year, since I was the only one left in my family. I need to go back and visit my mother and brother for the new year. He didn't insist further and offered to send me back. I refused. He was very busy before the new year, dealing with company matters and his parents, overwhelmed. Just have the driver take me to the airport. All right. Remember to contact me anytime. As I dragged my suitcase to the car, I couldn't help but look back at him. He stood under the eaves, his face blurred by the falling snow. I stood there, trying hard to remember his face clearly. Olivia. He called my name and walked down the steps toward me, but I hurriedly turned around and quickly got into the car. He didn't come forward anymore, and the car started. I couldn't help but press my face against the window. Looking back, the snow fell thicker and thicker, and his face became indistinguishable. Sitting in the car, tears silently streamed down my face, and my scarf was almost soaked. By the end of my crying, I managed a light smile. The driver looked at me through the rearview mirror with some surprise. Olivia, are you all right? I shook my head. I'm fine. I'm all right. The day before New Year's Eve, a scandal suddenly broke out at the Emma family in Beijing. The old story of Brady's mother hiring a hitman 10 years ago was suddenly brought up. Immediately, the entire Emma family was surrounded by reporters and media. The police took Brady's mother from her home. This new year, the Emma family probably won't have a good time. I sat in front of my mother and brother's graves, listening to my phone ring. When I answered the call, both Brady and I were calmer than we had imagined. Olivia, what are you doing? Accompanying my mother and brother. And you? Just returned from the company. I'm at the hospital now. Is it your father who is unwell? Yes. Another silence. The cemetery was very empty. The wind was cold, and I shrank my neck, wrapping my scarf tighter. I had eaten a bit of the seafood porridge my brother and I used to like for breakfast, and it was still making me nauseous. Olivia, From the beginning, was it all fake? Yes. Then suddenly proposing a breakup. That was my plan. The most exciting is what you can't get, and losing it at the sweetest moment makes you remember it forever. That day when you quarreled with your boyfriend. Oh, that was also deliberately arranged by me. I looked up at the dim sky. Everything was fake. My previous meek and gentle demeanor in front of you was fake. Later, when my boyfriend bullied me, that was also fake. Oh, and there was some truth in it. After reconciling, the way I was in front of you was the truest me. I heard a laugh beside my ear. Actually, quite cute. Brady can still laugh. I gazed at the photo of my brother on the tombstone. He died at the tender age of 18. From that day on, the sky above me has never been clear again. Olivia, I only just found out about those things. I'm very sorry. I gently touched my brother's handsome, sunny eyes. He resembled Brady a bit but not exactly. But their fates were completely different. I could not accept such ruthless and heartless measures. Small and humble people just want to live quietly and simply. Why should that offend anyone? Perhaps the only mistake was that my brother was too outstanding. He was admitted to one of the best universities in Beijing, and he was about to start his brilliant life. That's why Brady's mother couldn't sit still. It was never Brady who should apologize. It was me who dragged him into this mess. I want to see him. Is that okay? I knelt in front of my brother's grave, tears falling one by one onto his photo. Brady, don't come. Then I'll wait for you to come back. I won't be coming back. Olivia. Oh, and one more thing. I've been hiding it from you. What is it? I'm pregnant. According to the dates, it's been about 3 months today. Olivia, I'm sorry, Brady, but the baby can only live for these 3 months. Olivia. I heard his voice almost breaking. Was he heartbroken for the baby or for me? But in the end, it doesn't really matter. My mother told me before she died. Olivia, you must always remember how your brother died, how tragic and innocent it was. She gripped my hand, her nails digging deeply into my flesh, repeating before she fell into a coma, don't forgive anyone from the Emma family. Otherwise, in the future, when you go to the underworld, neither your brother nor I will see you. Brady, let it be. After I finished speaking, I slowly let go of the phone, and was about to hang up. Olivia, I've told you many times, girls shouldn't choose to harm themselves as a way to get revenge. I gently smiled, and ended the call. He called back quickly, but I turned off the sound and put the phone in my pocket. I continued to talk to my mother and brother for a long time. When the last bit of daylight was swallowed by the night, I dragged my stiff legs and got up, taking a taxi to the hospital. I had already scheduled the abortion surgery, and the doctors and nurses were waiting for me. The female doctor asked, "Are you sure you want the surgery? Are you sure you don't want this baby?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'm sure." "Then prepare yourself. The surgery can start soon." I nodded and walked toward the operating room. Lying on the operating table, waiting for the nurse to start the intravenous anesthesia, I stared up at the blank ceiling. The cold liquid entered my veins and body. My vision gradually blurred, and consciousness slipped away, as if I had just closed my eyes. Someone shook me awake. "Little girl, the surgery is over." The nurse gently shook me. I opened my eyes groggily. There was a vague pain deep in my abdomen but not intense. I slowly raised my hand, feeling my flat stomach with cold fingers. "Is it over?" "Yes, it's over." It went very smoothly. "Do you have family? You need to stay in the hospital for observation overnight." I shook my head. "No, I can manage alone." The nurse helped me up. I held my stomach and huddled as I walked out. In the hospital room, the nurse settled me in and placed my belongings by the bedside. The effect of the anesthetic wore off, and my lower abdomen hurt a lot. I slept and woke intermittently, moaning in pain during sleep. Just before dawn, the door to the room was suddenly pushed open. I was startled. breaking out in a cold sweat, and instinctively propped myself up, but then weakly fell back onto the bed. Brady looked utterly disheveled, with injuries on his forehead, hastily bandaged. His suit was torn in several places, stained with blood. Olivia. Brady took a few steps forward and then stopped. Unfortunately, you arrived late. I lay on the bed and smiled at him. Brady, if my mother were still alive and knew I was carrying a child from the Emma family, she would have killed me. She suffered through it once herself, and wouldn't want me to repeat it. She made a mistake once, but I won't make the same mistake. Olivia, that's also your child. Brady looked at me calmly. He is your flesh and blood. I paused and gently touched my stomach, then I can only apologize. Brady stood in silence for a long time. Finally, he came to my bedside, and left a card for me. Take good care of yourself. Still the same advice, no matter what happens. Don't use self-harm as a way to get revenge on others. He raised his hand, as if wanting to touch my forehead, but in the end, he didn't. I watched him leave the room, limping with every step. I wondered what had happened to him to make him so disheveled. I believe that, at some moment, no, perhaps at many moments, Brady had some genuine feelings for me, just like Noelle had for my mother back then. But that bit of sincerity was indeed too insignificant. For a woman, it might be a lifetime. For a man, it's just a pang of regret and a bittersweet memory after achieving success. The door closed gently. Brady's footsteps gradually faded away. I closed my eyes, curled up, and hugged myself tightly. I dreamed of the first time Brady and I met. He was wearing a black coat, standing by the window at the end of the corridor, smoking. I was chased by a few drunk patrons and, feeling cornered, rushed to his side and hid behind him, hugging his waist tightly. I bluffed at the pursuers. My boyfriend is here. Don't act recklessly. He raised an eyebrow, surprised for a moment, but then cooperated, and wrapped his arms around me, sternly telling the drunkards, get lost. When they left, the corridor fell silent again. Brady leaned against the window, looking down at me. How long are you going to hold on? I hurriedly let go and stammered my thanks. How old are you? 19. He shook his head slightly, not studying properly, but hanging out here. Part-time work and study. Part-time work and study in a place like this. He frowned slightly, took my hand, and said, come with me. He had long legs and big strides, and I stumbled to keep up. He even slowed his pace. I'll always remember that moonlight from that night. It was so beautiful it was heart-wrenching, making me momentarily dazed. But moonlight isn't for private possession. In this world, some people are destined never to find completeness. The story is now complete. Feel free to subscribe to the channel for the latest updates. A large number of novels are updated daily.